Keisha's hands trembled as she placed the signed confession on Thaddeus's mahogany desk, tears streaming down her face. "I did this for Ariel," she whispered, knowing that exposing the truth meant losing the only man she'd ever truly loved. But saving his empire was worth sacrificing her heart. Welcome back to the Powder Room Tales. If you're new, hit subscribe and join our family. Tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? Washington, New York, London? Wherever you are, may peace and favor follow you today. Now, let's dive into the story. The numbers on Keisha's phone screen glowed 11:47 p.m. as she swiped her badge at Cox Industries. Another night, another chance to disappear into the shadows of a world that once belonged to her. She pushed her cleaning cart through the marble lobby, wheels squeaking against the pristine floor. 8-year-old Ariel was asleep in their studio apartment, homework scattered across the fold-out table that doubled as their dinner table. Keisha had kissed her forehead before leaving, whispering the same promise she made every night. "Mama's going to make things better." The elevator climbed to the 47th floor, executive level. Keisha's stomach tightened the same way it had during her Harvard MBA classes when professors called on students who belonged there. Now she cleaned the offices of people who lived the life she'd lost. She unlocked Thaddeus Cox's corner office, breathing in the scent of leather and success. His desk held the usual scattered papers, merger documents, financial projections, partnership agreements with Hart Global Investments. Her trained eye caught the numbers automatically, old habits from her Wall Street days surfacing despite herself. "Stop looking," she commanded herself. "You're not that person anymore." But she was. Every night after Ariel fell asleep, Keisha studied market trends on her second-hand laptop. Her small savings account, $847.23, was her ammunition in careful day trades that sometimes bought groceries, sometimes paid for Ariel's school supplies. 47 floors below, Thaddeus Cox sat in his Tesla Model S, unable to drive home. The penthouse apartment felt like a mausoleum since Elena died. Every corner held her laughter, her piano music, her dreams of starting a family. His phone buzzed. Brian Hart. "Thad, the Singapore deal is gold. Trust me on this one. Elena would want you to take risks again." Thaddeus closed his eyes. Brian always knew which buttons to push. They'd met at grief counseling, two widowers rebuilding their lives. Brian had helped him navigate the worst year of his life, holding Cox Industries together when Thaddeus couldn't get out of bed. "The numbers looked aggressive," he said. "That's what makes money. Look, I handled the Stuttgart acquisition while you were barely functional. Let me handle Singapore." The guilt hit like it always did. Brian was right. Thaddeus had built Cox Industries from nothing, a Taiwanese immigrant son who turned a garage startup into a tech empire. But after Elena's cancer, he'd become a ghost in his own company. He started the car. The drive home took him past neighborhoods he'd forgotten existed, places where lights flickered in small apartments, where mothers worked multiple jobs to keep their children fed. Places like the one where Keisha Williams counted every dollar. Back on the 47th floor, Keisha emptied Thaddeus's trash and found something that made her freeze. A crumpled Hart Global invoice with handwritten notes on the margins. Her Harvard-trained mind processed the figures instantly. The numbers were wrong, not just wrong, deliberately manipulated. Her hands shook as she smoothed the paper. She recognized the pattern from her banking days. Shell companies, inflated consulting fees, money disappearing into accounts that didn't quite add up. Someone was stealing from Thaddeus Cox.
She looked around the empty office, heart pounding. The smart thing was to throw the paper away, finish her shift, and go home to Ariel. She was a janitor. This wasn't her business. But she'd seen good people destroyed by financial predators before. Her own mentor at Goldman Sachs had lost everything to a similar scheme. A partner he trusted, a friendship that masked embezzlement. Keisha folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her uniform pocket. 3 floors down, the elevator stopped. Thaddeus Cox stepped inside, looking exhausted in his expensive suit. He barely glanced at her, just another invisible worker in the building he owned. "Good evening, Mr. Cox," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised. His employees rarely acknowledged him personally, especially not at midnight. "Good evening." He paused, realizing he'd never learned her name. Keisha. "Keisha, working late again?" "Every night." She hesitated. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Thaddeus studied her face. Intelligent eyes, careful posture, something about her that didn't quite fit the uniform. "Of course. Do you ever feel like people only see what they expect to see?" The question hung between them. Thaddeus thought about Brian's constant reminders of his grief, his board's assumption that he was still too broken to lead effectively, and his own reflection in the mirror each morning. "Every day," he answered honestly. The elevator opened at the parking garage. As he stepped out, Thaddeus turned back. "Keisha, what made you ask that?" She met his eyes directly, not the deferential gaze of an employee, but the steady look of an equal. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we should watch most carefully. The doors closed before he could respond. Have you ever felt invisible in a situation where you actually had valuable insights to offer? This is just the beginning of Keisha and Thaddeus's journey. If you're ready to see how one woman's courage changes everything, subscribe and let's continue this emotional ride together. What do you think Keisha should do with the evidence she found? 3 days had passed since the elevator encounter, and Keisha couldn't stop thinking about Thaddeus's tired eyes. She'd folded the crumpled Hart Global invoice carefully in her uniform pocket, studying it during her lunch breaks. The numbers told a story she recognized from her Wall Street days. Shell companies, inflated fees, and money disappearing into accounts that existed only on paper. Brian Hart was stealing systematically, methodically, and brilliantly. Thursday night, 11:30 p.m. Keisha pushed her cart through the executive floor, Hart hammering against her ribs. She'd rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt impossible. The elevator dinged softly. Thaddeus stepped out, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. His usual perfect tie hung loose, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He carried a stack of Hart Global contracts under his arm. "Keisha." He paused, seeming genuinely pleased to see her. "Working late again?" "Mr. Cox, can I speak with you privately?" Something in her tone made him stop completely. He studied her face, the carefully controlled expression, the way her hands gripped the cleaning cart handle. "Of course. My office?" She nodded, following him down the marble hallway. Inside his corner office, Thaddeus closed the door and gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk. Keisha remained standing. "Sir, what I'm about to tell you—" Then she stopped. How do you tell a man that his closest friend, the person who held him together during his darkest hour, was robbing him blind? "Take your time," Thaddeus said gently. Keisha pulled the invoice from her pocket, hands trembling slightly. "I found this in your trash 3 nights ago. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't help myself."
Thaddeus took the paper, scanning the handwritten notes in the margins. This is Brian's writing. Adjustments to the Singapore consulting fees. "Mr. Cox, those adjustments are covering up embezzlement." The words tumbled out of her in a rush. "The shell companies, the inflated consulting fees, the offshore accounts. I've seen this pattern before." Thaddeus looked up sharply. "You've seen this before? How would you—" He caught himself, but the question hung in the air between them. Keisha took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she stopped hiding. "Because I used to work at Goldman Sachs. I had an MBA from Harvard. I know how these schemes work
Because I've prosecuted cases just like this one. The silence stretched between them. Thaddeus set down the invoice carefully, his expression unreadable. Goldman Sachs. 2008 financial crisis. Lost everything. Got pregnant, dropped out of Harvard before finishing my degree. Brian Hart isn't just skimming money, Mr. Cox. He's systematically draining your company dry. Thaddeus walked to his window, staring out at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Brian helped me through Elena's illness. He held this company together when I couldn't even get dressed in the morning. He's been like a brother to me. I know. Keisha's voice broke slightly. I know what it's like to trust someone who betrays you. My ex-boyfriend cost me my career, my future, everything I'd worked for. But Mr. Cox, this isn't about Brian being a bad friend. This is about him stealing millions of dollars from your employees' pension fund. The pension fund? The Singapore deal Brian's pushing? It's a front. The money goes in, but it doesn't come back out. Your employees, the security guards, the janitors, the clerks, they're going to lose their retirement because of this. The words hit Thaddeus like physical blows. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 38 years of age. How can you be sure? Keisha moved to his desk, pointing to specific numbers on the invoice. See this routing number? It goes to a bank in the Cayman Islands. This consulting fee, triple the market rate. And this signature approval process, it bypasses your CFO completely. As she explained, Thaddeus watched her transform. The quiet janitor disappeared, replaced by a brilliant financial analyst who spoke with authority and precision. Her posture straightened, her voice grew confident, her eyes lit up with expertise she'd been hiding for years. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked when she finished. "Because..." She hesitated, vulnerability creeping back into her voice. "Because I've spent 3 years watching you work late into the night, caring about your employees, trying to build something meaningful. Because I know what it's like to have everything stolen from you by someone you trust. And because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world where good people don't get destroyed by the ones closest to them." Thaddeus stood slowly, moving around his desk until he was standing directly in front of her. "What's your real name? Your full name?" "Keisha Williams. But it used to be Keisha Williams, MBA candidate, Harvard Business School, class of 2009. And now?" "Now I'm Keisha Williams, single mother, night janitor, and apparently the person who's about to destroy your friendship with Brian Hart." Thaddeus reached out, gently taking the invoice from her hands. Her fingers brushed, and Keisha felt electricity shoot up her arm. "You're not destroying anything," he said quietly. "You're saving everything." They stood there in the soft office lighting, two broken people who'd found something unexpected in each other. The successful CEO and the brilliant woman society had rendered invisible. "What happens now?" Keisha whispered. "Now we stop him," Thaddeus said. "Together." But as he said the words, both of them knew this was about more than stopping Brian. Something had shifted between them in this moment of absolute honesty, a recognition that transcended class, race, and circumstance. "Keisha," Thaddeus said as she moved toward the door, "thank you for trusting me with the truth. Thank you for listening." After she left, Thaddeus sat alone with the invoice, his world tilted off its axis. In one conversation, he learned that his closest friend was a thief, and that the woman he'd barely noticed was perhaps the most remarkable person he'd ever met. Keisha walked home through the empty streets, feeling exposed and exhilarated. She'd revealed herself completely to a man who could fire her with a word, but for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. Neither of them slept that night, both wondering what they'd started and where it would lead. The morning after her revelation, Keisha stood outside Cox Industries, staring up at the gleaming tower that now felt like a trap. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman caught between worlds,
the janitor's uniform hanging loosely on shoulders that had once worn Armani suits. Done. Inside the lobby, she avoided eye contact with the security guards, the receptionists, and anyone who might see the guilt written across her face. She'd crossed a line last night, revealed secrets that could destroy her carefully constructed invisibility. Ariel's sleepy voice echoed in her memory from that morning. "Mama, why were you crying in your sleep?" "Because I might have just ruined everything, baby girl." The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending to her execution. What if Thaddeus had spent the night questioning her motives? What if he thought he was lying, scheming, trying to manipulate him for some hidden agenda? What if he fired her? 3 floors up, Thaddeus sat in his corner office, the Hart Global invoice spread before him like evidence at a crime scene. He'd been there since 5 a.m., unable to sleep, unable to process what Keisha had told him. Brian's laughter from their grief counseling sessions echoed in his mind. The way his friend had held him when he sobbed after Elena's funeral. The steady hand on his shoulder during board meetings when Thaddeus couldn't trust his own voice. "Trust me, Thad. I've got your back." But the numbers didn't lie. Keisha's analysis was too precise, too detailed to be fabricated. The routing numbers, the shell companies, the pension fund transfers, it all painted a picture of systematic theft. His phone buzzed. Brian. "Morning, buddy. Ready to finalize Singapore today? The board meeting's at 10. Thaddeus stared at the phone, his oldest friend's voice now sounding foreign. "Brian, I need to ask you something." "Shoot." "The Cayman Islands account you set up for the Singapore routing. Can you walk me through that again?" A pause. Too long. "Of course, it's standard offshore processing for international deals. Keeps the transaction fees minimal." "Why?" "Just want to understand the structure better." "Thad, you're starting to sound like Elena used to when she'd question your business decisions." Brian's laughter was forced. "Trust me, haven't I always taken care of you?" The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced. Using Elena's memory, playing on his grief, reinforcing his dependence. Thaddeus felt sick. "I'll see you at the meeting," he said, ending the call. Keisha's hands shook as she emptied trash cans on the executive floor. Every footstep in the hallway made her freeze. When Thaddeus's office door opened, she nearly dropped the garbage bag. He stepped out, looking haggard but determined. Their eyes met, and Keisha saw something she hadn't expected. Gratitude, mixed with pain. "Keisha?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Could I speak with you?" She followed him into his office, acutely aware of how different this felt than last night. The intimacy was gone, replaced by awkward distance. "I spent the night verifying what you told me," he said, not inviting her to sit. "You're right. About everything." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by dread. "Mr. Cox, I'm sorry I put you in this position." "Don't." He held up a hand. "Don't apologize for telling the truth."
But his tone suggested otherwise. She could see it in his posture, the way he kept the desk between them. She'd forced him to see his best friend as a thief, and part of him resented her for it. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now I handle it. Quietly. Internally." He straightened papers on his desk, avoiding her gaze. "I appreciate what you did, but this is a business matter now." The dismissal stung more than she'd expected. "Of course. I should get back to work." As she turned to leave, Thaddeus called out, "Keisha?" She paused, hoping for warmth, connection, some acknowledgement of what had passed between them. "This conversation stays between us, for everyone's protection." "Understood." The board meeting at 10 was torture. Keisha watched from the hallway as Brian Hart strode into the conference room, all confidence and expensive cologne. He spotted her through the glass doors and gave her the dismissive nod he reserved for service staff. If only he knew. Inside the room, she could see Thaddeus struggling. His face was a mask of professional courtesy, but she recognized the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when Brian spoke. "The Singapore deal represents everything Cox Industries stands for," Brian was saying, his voice carrying through the partially open door. "Innovation, trust, partnership." Trust. The word hit Keisha like a slap. After the meeting, she found herself in the supply closet, fighting back tears. She'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility, and in one night, she'd shattered that safety. Worse, she'd glimpsed something beautiful with Thaddeus. Respect, connection, the possibility of being seen, only to watch him retreat behind corporate walls. Her phone buzzed. A text from her babysitter. "Ariel asking when you'll be home for dinner again. She misses you." The guilt crashed over her in waves. She was risking everything for a man who might never see her as more than a problem to manage discreetly. That evening, Brian Hart knocked on Thaddeus' office door. "Hey, buddy, you seemed off today. Everything okay?" Thaddeus looked up from the Hart Global files spread across his desk. "Just tired." "Alina's anniversary is coming up next month," Brian said softly, settling into the leather chair across from the desk. "I know it's always hard for you." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty, using Alina's memory to deflect suspicion, to reinforce Thaddeus' emotional dependence. "Brian," Thaddeus said carefully, "I've been thinking about our partnership structure. Maybe it's time I took a more hands-on role in the financial oversight." Brian's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course, though I hate to see you burden yourself with details when you should be focusing on the big picture. That's what partners are for." "Partners should trust each other completely." "Absolutely." Brian leaned forward. "Thad, is something bothering you? You know you can tell me anything." The audacity of it, sitting there, stealing millions while demanding trust and honesty. Thaddeus felt the friendship they'd shared, real as it had been, crumbling into something unrecognizable. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just want to be more involved." After Brian left, Thaddeus sat alone in the gathering darkness. He'd spent the day protecting a thief while pushing away the one person who'd been brave enough to tell him the truth. 47 floors below, Keisha walked to the bus stop through empty streets, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd chosen courage over safety, honesty over invisibility. Now she had to live with the consequences. Friday afternoon's emergency board meeting had ended in chaos. Brian Hart had convinced 3 board members to fast-track the Singapore deal, painting Thaddeus's hesitation as grief-induced paranoia. The vote was scheduled for Monday morning. Keisha stood at the copy machine on the 45th floor, photocopying Hart Global documents she'd borrowed from Thaddeus's office. Her hands shook as she documented the evidence: bank routing numbers, shell company registrations, falsified signatures, everything Thaddeus would need to stop Brian permanently.
The building's emergency alarm suddenly blared through the speakers. "Attention all personnel! Due to a security threat in the area, Cox Industries is under temporary lockdown. No one may enter or exit the building until further notice." Keisha's blood ran cold. She was trapped, 45 floors up, with stolen documents that could send Brian Hart to prison or get her killed if he discovered what she'd found. The elevator dinged. Thaddeus stepped out, looking frantic. "Keisha, thank God you're safe. They're saying there's a suspicious package in the lobby. Police have cordoned off the whole block." He noticed the scattered papers around the copier. "What are you—" "Working," she said quickly, gathering the documents. "Just some late filing for Mr. Patterson's office." But Thaddeus had already seen enough. Bank statements with Brian's signature, Cayman Islands routing numbers, his own forged authorization codes. "Keisha," his voice was deadly quiet. "What is this?" She looked up at him, cornered. "Evidence." "Of what?" "That Brian Hart has stolen over $15 million from Cox Industries in the past 18 months. The lockdown announcement repeated overhead. Thaddeus moved closer, studying the papers spread across the copy machine. His face went pale as he recognized his own company's financial death warrant. "How did you get these?" "I've been watching him for weeks, staying late, copying documents, tracing the money trail." Keisha's voice strengthened with her conviction. "Thaddeus, he's not just stealing from you. He's stealing from every employee in this building. The pension fund, the health insurance premiums, the Christmas bonuses, it's all being funneled through fake consulting contracts." Thaddeus sank into a nearby chair. $15 million? More. This is just what I could trace without access to the main accounting system. She sat across from him, the evidence spread between them like a bridge neither could cross. "I'm sorry. I know he's your friend. Was my friend." Thaddeus picked up a bank statement showing a $2.3 million transfer to Hart Global Consulting. "Elena loved him. She used to say Brian was the brother I never had." They sat in silence, the building eerily quiet around them. Outside, police sirens wailed, but inside the 45th floor, it felt like the whole world had shrunk to just the two of them. "The board voted to approve Singapore on Monday," Thaddeus said finally. "I know. I heard about the meeting." "If this goes through, Brian walks away with another $20 million. Clean. Untraceable." Keisha leaned forward. "Then we stop him." "How?" "The board thinks I'm unstable. Half of them believe Brian's story that I'm having a breakdown. If I walk into that meeting accusing him of embezzlement based on evidence gathered by—" He stopped, realizing how it would sound. "By the janitor," Keisha finished quietly. "I wasn't going to say that." "But it's what they'll think." She stood, moving to the window. The street below swarmed with police cars and emergency vehicles. But inside the 45th floor, it felt like the whole world had shrunk to just the two of them. "What if you weren't wearing a uniform?" he asked softly. "What do you mean?" "What if Keisha Williams, Harvard Business School, former Goldman Sachs analyst, presented this evidence to the board?" She turned to face him, hope and terror warring in her chest. "They would want to know why I was working as a janitor."
So you tell them. You tell them about 2008, about your ex-boyfriend, about being a single mother who did what she had to do to survive. His eyes searched her face. You tell them the truth. And if they don't believe me, they will, because I'll be standing right beside you. The building shuddered slightly as helicopters circled overhead. The lockdown had trapped them together, but Keisha realized it had also given them something precious. Time to plan, to prepare, to trust each other completely. "Brian will destroy me," she said. "He'll make sure I never work in finance again." "Brian's going to federal prison," Thaddeus replied firmly. "And you're going to be the woman who put him there." She studied his face, the determination in his dark eyes, the set of his jaw, the way he looked at her as if she were the most capable person in the world. When was the last time someone had believed in her like this? "Thaddeus," she began, then stopped. The attraction between them was undeniable, but now wasn't the time. Too much was at stake. "I know," he said softly, reading her thoughts. "After Monday, after we finish this," she agreed. The lockdown announcement crackled through the speakers again. They were stuck here for at least another hour, maybe longer. Keisha gathered the evidence into neat piles, organizing her case against Brian Hart. "Help me understand these offshore transfers," Thaddeus said, pulling up a chair beside her. "Show me how he did it." As she began explaining the intricate web of financial fraud, Thaddeus watched her transform once again. The brilliant analyst emerged, confident and authoritative, the woman she'd been before circumstances forced her into hiding. Sitting so close, working together, their hands occasionally brushing as they sorted through papers, both of them felt it, the undeniable pull between them, stronger now for being acknowledged but restrained.
They had work to do, a company to save, a criminal to catch. But first they had tonight. Circumstances beyond their control, finally seeing each other clearly, building something that felt like a partnership and might become something more. Have you ever had to choose between staying safe in the shadows or stepping into the light to fight for what's right? Keisha and Thaddeus are about to face their biggest challenge yet. With the board meeting looming and their hearts on the line, will love give them the strength to expose the truth? Share your thoughts on what you think will happen when they confront Brian.
The coffee shop on Fifth Street buzzed with morning energy, but Keisha felt like she was drowning. 3 weeks had passed since she'd warned Thaddeus about Brian, and everything had spiraled out of control. The FBI investigation was moving too slowly. Brian was pressuring Thaddeus to sign the Singapore deal immediately. And worst of all, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Thaddeus had looked at her that night in his office. "Mama, you're not listening," Ariel said, tugging on her sleeve. Keisha blinked, focusing on her daughter's concerned face. "Sorry, baby girl, what did you say?" "I said Mrs. Rodriguez wants to meet with you about my grades. She thinks I'm gifted." The irony wasn't lost on Keisha. Her 8-year-old daughter was being recognized for her intelligence, while Keisha spent her nights hiding hers. "That's wonderful, Ariel. We'll schedule something." Her phone buzzed, a text from Thaddeus. "Can we talk? It's about Brian." Keisha's heart raced. They'd barely spoken since that night, maintaining professional distance, despite the electricity that crackled between them whenever their paths crossed. She typed back, "After work, usual place." The usual place was his office at midnight, when the building was empty and they could speak freely. Thaddeus was waiting when she arrived, but he wasn't alone. A woman in her 60s sat in one of the leather chairs, elegant, silver-haired, with kind eyes that reminded Keisha of someone. "Keisha, I'd like you to meet Margaret Cox, my mother." Keisha froze. She was still in her janitor's uniform, cleaning cart beside her, suddenly face to face with the mother of the man she was falling for. "Mrs. Cox, Please, sit." Margaret's voice was warm but commanding. "Thaddeus has told me about you, about what you've discovered regarding Brian Hart." Keisha remained standing, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, you should probably hear what I have to say about Brian Hart." Margaret's tone sharpened. "And about why my son is so reluctant to believe the truth about his so-called friend." Thaddeus sank into his chair, looking suddenly young and vulnerable. "Mom, we don't need to." "Yes, we do." Margaret turned to Keisha. "My dear, do you know how my son met Brian Hart?" "Grief counseling, after his wife died." "That's what Brian told him. But it wasn't grief counseling, Keisha. It was at Elena's funeral." The words hung heavy in the air. Thaddeus's face went pale. "What do you mean?" Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "After you told me about Keisha's concerns, I did some investigating of my own. Brian Hart never lost a wife. He's never even been married." She opened the envelope, spreading photographs across the desk. "These are from Elena's viewing. Brian arrived early, introduced himself to the funeral director as your business partner. He studied the guest book, learned who your friends were and your business contacts. He positioned himself perfectly to accidentally meet you during your most vulnerable moment." "He stalked me," Thaddeus said. "He researched you," Margaret corrected. "Your company's financial reports were public. He knew you were worth millions, knew you were emotionally devastated, knew you'd be easy to manipulate." Keisha felt sick. "How long have you known?" "I suspected from the beginning. A mother knows when something doesn't feel right about her son's friends. But I had no proof until now." Margaret pulled out another document. "This is Brian's real name, Brian Hartwell. He's done this before, targeted grieving business owners, gained their trust, and embezzled their money. There are victims in Chicago, Miami, and Denver. Thaddeus stood abruptly, walking to the window. 3 years, 3 years of friendship, of him helping me rebuild, of me trusting him with everything. It wasn't friendship, Keisha said softly. It was a job to him. The worst part, Margaret continued, is that he's been planning this Singapore deal from the beginning. The shell companies were established 6 months after Elena died. He's been setting up this theft for over 2 years. Keisha studied the financial documents, her Harvard training kicking in automatically. Mrs. Cox, these routing numbers, they don't just go to the Cayman Islands. They bounce through Switzerland, then Bermuda, then back to a domestic account. Whose account? Thaddeus asked, turning back to them. Keisha traced the paper trail with her finger. Hart Holdings, LLC. But look at this, she pointed to a signature line. The beneficial owner isn't Brian Hart. It's someone named Elena Hartwell. The name hit the room like a bomb. He used my wife's name, Thaddeus whispered. Margaret nodded grimly. He's been using Elena's memory to manipulate you from day one. Every time you questioned a decision, he'd say, Elena would want you to take this risk, or Elena would be proud of your boldness. Keisha watched Thaddeus process the betrayal. Seeing the moment, his grief transformed into rage. But then something else flickered across his face. Relief. Why relief? She asked, reading his expression. Because I was starting to think I was crazy. For the past month since you warned me, I've been questioning everything, every memory, every conversation. I thought maybe my grief had made me paranoid. He looked directly at her. But you saw it too. Your instincts were right. Margaret stood, gathering the documents. Keisha, I need to ask you something. Are you willing to help us stop him? The FBI will need someone who understands financial fraud to walk them through the evidence. Mrs. Cox, I'm just a janitor. No, you're not, Margaret's voice was firm. You're a brilliant woman who lost her way and found it again. My son has told me about your background, your expertise. We need you. Keisha looked between mother and son, seeing the trust in their eyes. For the first time in years, someone was asking for her help, not despite who she was, but because of who she was. What do you need me to do? Thaddeus moved closer. We need you to meet with the FBI tomorrow, walk them through the financial trail, help them understand the scope of what Brian's done. And after that? After that, we spring the trap. Brian thinks he's won. He thinks I'm going to sign the Singapore deal next week. Instead, we're going to give him exactly what he deserves. As Margaret left them alone, Thaddeus and Keisha stood in the quiet office, the weight of revelation settling between them. I'm sorry, Thaddeus said quietly. I'm sorry you had to be the one to see what I couldn't. I'm not sorry, Keisha replied. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He reached for her hand, no longer caring about propriety or class differences. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Together, she agreed, finally allowing herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this second chance at everything she'd lost. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Brian, and the FBI investigation was in full swing. Keisha found herself spending more time on the executive floor, not as a janitor, but as a key witness and financial consultant helping to untangle Brian's web of deception. It was 9 p.m. on a Friday, and most of the building was empty. Keisha sat in the conference room surrounded by boxes of financial records, her laptop open, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She'd been working for 12 hours straight, helping federal investigators trace Brian's money trail. You should go home, Thaddeus said from the doorway. Ariel's probably wondering where you are. Keisha looked up, noting the exhaustion in his eyes. He'd aged in the past 2 weeks, the stress of betrayal, media scrutiny, and the looming threat to his company taking its toll. Ariel's at my neighbor's house. She's doing homework and eating dinner that doesn't come from a vending machine. Keisha gestured to the empty chip bag beside her laptop. What's your excuse for still being here?
Thaddeus stepped into the room, loosening his tie. Same as yours, trying to save what's left of Cox Industries. The insurance company had frozen several accounts pending the investigation. 3 major clients had pulled their contracts, spooked by the scandal. The board was meeting daily, some members calling for Thaddeus's resignation. The Morrison account came back, Thaddeus said, settling into the chair across from her. Your presentation convinced them that we're worth the risk. Keisha smiled tiredly. I just showed them the numbers. Companies recover from financial scandals all the time if they handle them transparently. It wasn't just the numbers. Thaddeus studied her face in the soft conference room lighting. You have this way of making people believe in possibility, even when everything looks hopeless. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had cleaned his office for 3 years, now wearing a simple business suit instead of a janitor's uniform. I learned that from my daughter. When you're 8 years old and your mama has to work 3 jobs, you either become bitter or you become an optimist. Ariel chose optimism. Tell me about her. I mean, really, tell me. Not just that she's smart and brave. What's she like? Keisha's expression softened. She asks about you every night. How's Mr. Thaddeus today, Mama? Is he still sad about his friend being bad? She has this way of cutting through adult complications and getting to the heart of things. She sounds remarkable. She wants to meet you. Properly, I mean. Not just seeing you in the elevator. She asked if you could come to dinner sometime. I told her it was complicated. Is it? Complicated? The question hung between them, loaded with weeks of unspoken tension. They'd grown close during the investigation. Late nights reviewing documents, shared meals from the executive dining room, conversations that had moved far beyond business. Thaddeus, Keisha said carefully, you're my boss. You're dealing with a major crisis. You're still grieving your wife. And I'm a single mother with a complicated past. If that's not complicated, I don't know what is. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. What if none of that mattered? What if we just focused on this? How I feel when I'm with you? How you light up when you talk about financial forensics? How you make me remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow? Keisha's breath caught. How do you feel when I'm with you? Like I'm myself again, not the grieving widower or the CEO under siege. Just me, the person I was before life got so heavy. She turned her hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. You scare me, she admitted. Because I'm your boss? Because you make me want things I gave up hoping for. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because I'm falling for you, and I don't know how to protect my heart or my daughter if this goes wrong. Thaddeus stood slowly, still holding her hand, and walked around the table. He knelt beside her chair, bringing them to eye level. Keisha, I know you've been hurt before. I know trusting someone with your heart feels impossible right now. But I need you to know something. Elena would have loved you. Tears welled in Keisha's eyes. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you need to understand that what I feel for you isn't about replacing her. It's about discovering that the heart can hold more than one love story. He cupped her face gently. Elena made me believe in love. You're making me believe in love again. What if the investigation changes things? What if your board forces you out? What if Brian's scheme damages the company beyond repair? Then we'll figure it out together. You've already proven you can survive losing everything. I'm learning that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about choosing to rebuild with the people who matter. Keisha leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I haven't been on a real date in 4 years. I haven't been on a date in 6 years. We'll figure it out. Ariel will interrogate you mercilessly.
I'm prepared for that. I've been researching her favorite books and movies. Keisha laughed, the sound breaking the tension. You've been researching my 8-year-old daughter? I may have asked my assistant to compile a dossier on age-appropriate conversation topics. His expression grew serious again. Keisha,
I don't just want to date you. I want to be part of your life, both your lives, if you'll let me." She studied his face, the sincerity in his gentle way he touched her, the man who'd listened to her warnings and seen her worth when society had rendered her invisible. "One dinner," she said finally, "at my apartment. Nothing fancy. Ariel gets to ask you anything she wants, and if she doesn't approve, then I'll keep trying until I earn it." Thaddeus stood, helping her to her feet. "When?" "Tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. Fair warning, she's making her famous spaghetti, which means there will be sauce everywhere, and she'll probably try to teach you to play her video games. I can't wait." They stood close together in the empty conference room, financial documents scattered around them like the pieces of their old lives. Slowly, carefully, Thaddeus leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gentle promise rather than a demand. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "For what?" "For seeing the man I could become instead of just the one I've been." As they gathered the documents and prepared to leave, Keisha felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not just for survival or getting through another day, but for building something beautiful with someone who saw her completely. Walking to the elevator together, their hands briefly touched, no longer the accidental contact of boss and employee, but the intentional connection of two people choosing to trust each other with their hearts. "Thaddeus," she said as the elevator doors opened. "Yes?" "Elena sounds like she was an amazing woman." "She was, and so are you." The doors closed, carrying them down from the executive floor where they had found each other, toward a future neither of them had dared to imagine just weeks before. 2 weeks had passed since Keisha and Thaddeus had kissed in his office. 2 weeks of stolen moments, secret glances, and a growing love that felt both inevitable and impossible. They'd been gathering evidence against Brian Hart methodically, carefully, like surgeons preparing for a delicate operation. But tonight, everything was about to fall apart. Keisha sat in her car outside Ariel's school, hands shaking as she read the text message for the 3rd time. "Miss Williams, please call me urgently regarding your daughter's tuition. We need to discuss payment arrangements immediately. Principal Martinez." The private school scholarship she'd fought so hard to secure was in jeopardy. The academy that was supposed to give Ariel the future Keisha never had was about to slip away because she was $300 short on this month's fees. $300. The same amount she'd spent on a decent blazer for her secret meetings with Thaddeus. The same amount that stood between her daughter's dreams and another cycle of poverty. Her phone buzzed. "Thaddeus. Can't wait to see you tonight. I have something important to ask you. T." Keisha closed her eyes, fighting back tears. How could she face him tonight? How could she tell the man she was falling in love with that she was failing as a mother? That while they were playing to be equals in his marble office, her 8-year-old daughter was about to lose her place in the world that mattered. At 8 p.m., Keisha arrived at Cox Industries, her heart heavy with dread. She'd rehearsed the conversation a dozen times. She would tell Thaddeus about the school, about the money, about how their romance was a beautiful fantasy that couldn't survive the harsh reality of their different worlds. Thaddeus was waiting in his office, pacing with nervous energy. He dimmed the lights and set out Chinese takeout from her favorite restaurant, the little place in Chinatown where she'd mentioned taking Ariel for special occasions. "Keisha." His face lit up when he saw her, but the smile faded when he noticed her expression. "What's wrong?"
She stood in the doorway, unable to step fully into his world tonight. "Thaddeus, we need to talk." "Good, because I need to talk to you too." He moved toward her, hands reaching for her face in the gentle gesture she'd come to love. "I've been thinking about us, about our future." "Stop." The word came out harsher than she intended. Just stop. Thaddeus dropped his hands, confusion clouding his features. Keisha, what happened? Is it Brian? It's not Brian. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold in the warm office. It's reality, Thaddeus. It's the fact that while we've been playing house in your ivory tower, I can't even keep my daughter in school. The words hung between them like a physical barrier. Thaddeus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, concern, and then something that looked dangerously like pity. The tuition, she continued, her voice getting stronger and more bitter with each word. The private academy I fought to get her into? They want their money, and I don't have it. While I've been daydreaming about corporate boardrooms and fancy dinners, my daughter is about to be kicked back into the public school system, where dreams go to die. Keisha, if this is about money, I can— No! The rejection exploded out of her with shocking violence. Don't you dare! Don't you dare try to fix this with your checkbook. Thaddeus took a step back, stung. I'm trying to help. Help? Keisha laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to help? You want to swoop in and save the poor single mother with your billionaire money? Make yourself feel better about sleeping with the help? That's not fair. Thaddeus's voice was quiet, but she could see the hurt in his eyes. Do I? Keisha's composure cracked completely, because from where I'm standing, I'm still the janitor who cleans your office while you're the CEO who can solve any problem with a wire transfer. $300, Thaddeus, that's all it would take to save my daughter's future, and it's pocket change to you, but it's everything to me. Then you still don't get it. Keisha's voice dropped to a whisper. If you pay for Ariel's school, what does that make me? Your employee? Your charity case? Your kept woman? The accusation hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. Keisha, I love you. Love? She turned away, unable to look at his face. Love doesn't pay tuition, Thaddeus. Love doesn't put food on the table or keep the lights on. Love is a luxury I can't afford. That's not true, isn't it? She spun back to face him, tears streaming down her face. 2 weeks ago, I was invisible. Now suddenly I matter because I caught your attention? Because I'm useful to you in stopping Brian? I know that's not— I found something today, she interrupted, pulling a folder from her purse with shaking hands. Brian's been siphoning money for 18 months. $15 million, all documented right here. Enough evidence to put him away and save your company. She placed the folder on his desk like an offering. There, I've done what you needed me to do. The poor janitor has served her purpose. Thaddeus stared at the folder, then back at her. This isn't about the evidence. This is about you being scared. Scared? Keisha's voice rose. I'm terrified, Thaddeus. Terrified that I'm falling in love with a man I can never truly be equal to. Terrified that my daughter will grow up thinking her mother was someone's mistress instead of someone's equal. You are my equal, Thaddeus said desperately. Your mind, your heart, your strength. My bank account says otherwise. My address says otherwise. The fact that you could solve my biggest problem with what you spend on lunch says otherwise. Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. So, what are you saying? I'm saying this was a mistake. Each word felt like swallowing glass. I'm saying that Cinderella stories don't exist in real life, and I was foolish to think they did. Keisha, I'm saying that after tonight, I'll finish gathering evidence against Brian, but I can't do this, she gestured between them. I can't pretend we live in the same world when every day reminds me that we don't. Thaddeus moved toward her one more time, hope and desperation warring on his face. What if we could make it work? What if
you could what? Buy me a new life? Purchase my daughter a different last name? Keisha shook her head. I won't be anyone's project, Thaddeus, not even yours. She headed for the door, then paused without turning around. The evidence is all there. You have everything you need to stop Brian and save Cox Industries. That's what this was always about, wasn't it? Keisha, please. But she was already gone, leaving him alone with the folder that contained Brian's crimes and the wreckage of something that might have been beautiful. Thaddeus sank into his chair, staring at the Chinese food growing cold on his desk. He'd planned to ask her to move in with him tonight. He'd planned to offer to pay for Ariel's education, not as charity, but as an investment in their future together. Instead, he'd watched the woman he loved walk away, convinced that his love was just another form of pity. Outside in the elevator, Keisha collapsed against the wall, sobbing for everything she'd just thrown away. She loved him. God help her, she loved him more than she'd ever loved anyone. But love without equality was just another form of servitude, and she'd rather be alone with her dignity than together as his beautiful charity case. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying her away from the man who'd made her feel whole again, and back to a world where $300 was the difference between hope and despair. Neither of them slept that night, both wondering if the love they'd found was strong enough to survive the brutal mathematics of inequality.
The next morning, Thaddeus confronted Brian in his office, the crumpled invoice burning in his memory. "The Singapore routing numbers," Thaddeus said carefully. "Walk me through them." Brian's smile never wavered. "Processing bank, tax optimization through the Cayman Islands, standard international procedure." But Thaddeus was watching his friend's face, remembering Keisha's certainty. Every explanation sounded rehearsed. That evening, they met at a 24-hour diner across town. Thaddeus looked haggard in jeans and a baseball cap. "I had IT pull his access logs," he said, sliding a folder across to Keisha. "You were right. Brian's been moving money for 8 months. Small amounts during Elena's treatments, larger amounts recently." Keisha studied the documents, her Harvard training taking over. "The pension fund transfer is scheduled for next Friday. $15 million. We need real evidence, not just suspicious invoices. His office is on the 45th floor, but I have building access at night. I can't ask you to. I'm volunteering." 3 nights later, Keisha used her janitor access to photograph documents in Brian's office. She found more than fraud. She found his pattern of targeting grieving executives, destroying previous companies, systematically robbing partners who trusted him. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Keisha. I know you're in my office right now." Brian's voice was calm, terrifying. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll destroy whatever evidence you've gathered and disappear. If you don't, I'll destroy Thaddeus with affair rumors and make sure Child Protective Services investigates your fitness as a mother. Your choice, his reputation and your daughter's safety, or your little crusade for justice." The line went dead. The next evening, Keisha found Thaddeus in his office, her face streaked with tears. "He knows," she whispered, telling him about the threats. Thaddeus held her as she cried. "I can't let him hurt Ariel, and I can't let you destroy you." That morning, Thaddeus called the FBI. If Brian wanted to threaten his family, he'd learn what happened when you cornered a desperate man. For weeks, Keisha wore a wire, gathering evidence while maintaining her role as a janitor. She and Thaddeus grew closer through the danger, stolen moments in empty conference rooms, quiet conversations after hours, a love blooming under impossible circumstances. But the strain was enormous. The constant deception, the fear of discovery, the weight of knowing one mistake could cost them everything. The breaking point came when Brian cornered Keisha in the supply closet. $50,000, he offered. "Take your daughter and disappear. Thaddeus will get over his little crush." "It's not a crush, isn't it? A rich man playing with the help. How do you think this ends? You think he'll marry you? Introduce you to his country club as his former janitor's wife?" The poison words fed every insecurity she'd carried.
That night, when Thaddeus tried to comfort her and talk about their future, the doubts exploded. "What future?" she demanded. "You giving me a job? A nice apartment? Keeping me as your beautiful secret? That's not what this is, isn't it? God, I'm so stupid. I thought this was real."
In the elevator, everything shattered. She accused him of pity disguised as love. He accused her of running instead of fighting. Both said things they didn't mean, hurt driving them apart when they needed each other most. Instead, he'd watched the woman he loved walk away, convinced that his love was just another form of pity. Outside in the elevator, Keisha collapsed against the wall, sobbing for everything she'd just thrown away. She loved him, God help her, she loved him more than she'd ever loved anyone. But love without equality was just another form of servitude, and she'd rather be alone with her dignity than together as his beautiful charity case. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying her away from the man who'd made her feel whole again, and back to a world where $300 was the difference between hope and despair. Neither of them slept that night, both wondering if the love they'd found was strong enough to survive the brutal mathematics of inequality. But love, it turned out, was stronger than pride. 2 weeks later, Thaddeus appeared at her studio apartment with a ring and a proposal that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with choosing each other despite the odds. They married quietly, desperately, clinging to each other while the FBI built their case. For 3 months they tried to make it work, but the investigation consumed everything. The lies, the constant fear, the weight of bringing down the man who'd tried to destroy them. Keisha moved back to her mother's house upstate with Ariel, needing space to breathe, to think, to figure out who she was beyond the woman who'd saved Thaddeus Cox. The wedding ring sat in a drawer, too heavy with complicated emotions to wear. Then, Agent Martinez called with the final request. "We need you to make one final call to Brian, then come in for the sting operation. He has to believe everything is normal." Which meant facing Thaddeus again, which meant pretending their marriage wasn't falling apart while she helped finish what they'd started. Keisha made the call from her mother's house, her voice carefully controlled as she told Brian she wanted to reconcile with Thaddeus, that she'd sign off on the Singapore deal to prove her commitment to their marriage. Brian, predictable as ever, took the bait completely. The FBI conference room felt like a tomb. Keisha sat across from Agent Martinez, a stack of financial documents between them that represented 3 months of careful investigation. Her hands rested flat on the cold metal table, wedding ring absent. She'd left it at home, unable to bear its weight. "Mrs. Cox," Agent Martinez said gently, "we need you to make the call." Agent Martinez slid a phone across the table. "The call has already been made. Brian believes you're coming in this morning to reconcile with your husband and authorize the Singapore transfer." "He took the bait?" Keisha asked. "Completely. He's expecting you at Cox Industries in 2 hours, convinced that you'll sign off on the deal to prove your commitment to saving your marriage." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "But there's something else you need to know. Hart's been planning this for over a year, since before you ever warned your husband about the embezzlement. He's anticipated every move, every possible obstacle, except one." "What's that?" "He never anticipated that the janitor who exposed him would become the CFO with the power to stop him." Keisha stood, smoothing down her professional blazer. "Agent Martinez, when this is over, when Brian's in custody and the money is recovered, will my husband ever forgive me for the lies?" The agent's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Cox, you're not lying to hurt him. You're lying to save him. Sometimes that's what love looks like." Keisha walked toward the door, then paused. "There's something you should know.
When I first warned Thaddeus about Brian's embezzlement, I thought I was saving a stranger's company. I had no idea I was saving the man I'd fall in love with, marry, and nearly lose to the very criminal we're about to bring down. And now? Now I'm going to finish what I started. Brian Hart picked the wrong janitor to underestimate.
The Cox Industries lobby felt different as Keisha walked through it at 7:30 a.m. 3 months ago, she'd been the invisible janitor pushing a cart through these marble halls. Now, she was the estranged CFO, returning to spring the trap that would save her husband's empire. Brian Hart was waiting by the executive elevator, perfectly groomed in his expensive suit, wearing the same concerned expression that had fooled them all for so long. "Keisha," he said, opening his arms for a hug that made her skin crawl. "You look wonderful. I'm so glad you called." "Thank you for agreeing to help," she said, forcing warmth into her voice. "I know things between Thaddeus and me have been difficult. Marriages go through rough patches. What matters is that you're both willing to fight for what you have." The irony was staggering. This man had orchestrated every rough patch, fed every doubt, and manipulated every conflict that had driven them apart. They rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, Keisha's heart nearly stopped. There, standing by his office door, was Thaddeus. He looked older, thinner, worn down by months of separation and the stress of running a company while his personal life fell apart. When he saw her, his entire face transformed. Hope, pain, love, and wariness all warring in his expression. "Keisha," he said quietly. "Thaddeus." The formal distance between them was excruciating. Every instinct screamed at her to run to him, to explain everything, to end this charade. But she caught sight of Brian watching them carefully and forced herself to maintain the pretense. "I asked Brian to help us, to see if we can work things out." Thaddeus' eyes searched her face. "Is that what you want?" "I want our family back." And that, at least, was completely true. Brian stepped forward, ever the helpful mediator. "Why don't we sit down in the conference room, talk through some of these issues?" For the next hour, Keisha played her role perfectly. She expressed doubts about their marriage, concerns about their different backgrounds, and fears about being seen as a charity case. Every word was designed to reinforce Brian's belief that their relationship was fragile, that she was unsure, that she could be manipulated. And all the while, she watched her husband's face crumble a little more with each carefully chosen doubt. "The Singapore deal," Brian said eventually, steering the conversation where he needed it to go. "Keisha, as CFO, your signature is required. If you're planning to work things out with Thaddeus, perhaps we could handle that business first, clear the decks for your personal reconciliation." Keisha looked at Thaddeus, saw the hope flickering in his eyes, and nearly broke. "If it helps the company, if it proves I'm committed to making this work, it would mean everything," Brian said smoothly. "Thaddeus has been so worried about the company's stability while you two have been apart. Knowing you're willing to sign off on this major deal would show incredible faith in your shared future." Thaddeus frowned slightly. Something in Brian's tone, perhaps, or the way he was pushing the business agenda in what should have been a personal conversation. "The Singapore deal can wait," Thaddeus said. "I'm more concerned about, actually, I'd like to handle it now. Prove that I can separate personal issues from business responsibilities." She pulled out her laptop, connected to the Cox Industries server, and navigated to the authorization page. Brian leaned forward eagerly, watching every keystroke. "Just your electronic signature there," he said, pointing to the screen, "and the transfer will be complete." Keisha's finger hovered over the mouse. This was it, the moment Brian would try to steal $15 million and disappear forever. The moment the FBI was waiting for. She clicked Authorize. For exactly 3 seconds, Brian's mask slipped completely. Pure,
Triumph flashed across his face, the look of a predator who'd had finally cornered his prey. He actually smiled, thinking he'd won. Then, his phone buzzed. A text from his offshore bank confirming the transfer had been initiated.
"Excellent," he said, barely containing his excitement. "I should go make sure the board is ready for the meeting." He practically sprinted from the conference room. Keisha and Thaddeus sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, her husband spoke. "That wasn't about the Singapore deal, was it?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Thaddeus, I'm so sorry for everything, for the lies, for the separation, for making you believe our marriage was falling apart when all I've ever wanted was to protect it." His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that looked like relief. "The FBI operation. You've been working with them this whole time. He was going to destroy you, destroy us, steal everything and disappear, leaving you to take the blame. I couldn't let that happen." Thaddeus crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "God, Keisha, I thought I'd lost you. These past 3 months have been hell. I never stopped loving you, not for a second, but I had to make Brian believe we were finished, or he would have run before we could catch him." They held each other as if afraid the other might disappear, 3 months of forced separation finally ending. "Mrs. Cox?" Agent Martinez's voice came from the doorway. "It's done." Through the conference room windows, they could see FBI agents leading Brian Hart away in handcuffs. His face was a mask of shock and rage as he realized he'd been caught. "The money?" Thaddeus asked. "Frozen before it left the server. Every penny will be returned to Cox Industries and the pension fund." Keisha watched Brian disappear into the elevator, the same elevator where she'd first warned Thaddeus about trusting people too quickly. The man who'd tried to destroy them was finally gone. "What happens now?" Agent Martinez asked. "Now you rebuild both your company and your marriage." 1 year later, the Cox Industries annual gala was in full swing. Keisha stood at the podium, no longer the invisible janitor or the conflicted CFO, but the confident co-leader of a company that not only survived Brian Hart's betrayal, but emerged stronger than ever. "A year ago," she began, addressing the crowd of employees, board members, and clients, "this company faced its darkest hour. Someone we trusted tried to steal our future. But what he didn't understand is that Cox Industries isn't just a business, it's a family, and families protect each other." Applause filled the ballroom. From the head table, Thaddeus watched his wife with undisguised pride. Beside him, 10-year-old Ariel beamed, wearing a new dress and the confidence that came from finally having the stable family she'd always dreamed of. "Today, I'm proud to announce the Cox Foundation's first scholarship recipients. 15 employees are returning to school, pursuing degrees that will help them advance their careers, because we believe that everyone who walks through our doors has untapped potential. They just need someone to see it." The first recipient was Janet, a night security guard pursuing her accounting degree. The second was Marcus, a cafeteria worker studying business management. One by one, Keisha called their names, remembering her own journey from invisible worker to executive leader. After the ceremony, the family of 3 found themselves on the executive balcony where so many of their important conversations had taken place. "Are you happy, Mama?" Ariel asked, echoing the question she'd posed in their tiny studio apartment years ago. "Happier than I ever thought possible, baby girl." "And Daddy?" Thaddeus scooped Ariel up, spinning her around as she giggled. "The happiest man alive." He set her down and pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Actually, there's one more surprise." Keisha opened it to find official documentation, not from Harvard. That chapter was behind her,
but something even more meaningful. Incorporation papers for the Keisha Williams Foundation, funded by the recovered money from Brian's scheme.
You've come to the end of this love story, but another billionaire's secret is waiting. The next tale will be more seductive, more forbidden, and far more addictive. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Until then, guard your heart, because the Powder Room Tales is only getting started.